From its origin as a city-state on the peninsula of Italy in the 8th century BC, to its rise as an empire covering much of southern Europe, Western Europe, Near East and North Africa, to its fall in the 5th century AD. The political history of ancient Rome was closely entwined with its military history. The core of the campaign history of the Roman military is an aggregate of different accounts of the Roman military's land battles, from its initial defense against and subsequent conquest of the city's hilltop neighbors on the Italian peninsula, to the ultimate struggle of the Western Roman Empire for its existence against invading Huns, Vandals and Germanic tribes. These accounts were written by various authors throughout and after the history of the empire. Following the First Punic War, naval battles were less significant than land battles to the military history of Rome due to its encompassment of lands of the periphery and its unchallenged dominance of the Mediterranean Sea. The Roman army battled first against its tribal neighbors and Etruscan towns within Italy, and later came to dominate the Mediterranean and at its height, the provinces of Britannia and Asia Minor. As with most ancient civilizations, Rome's military served the triple purpose of securing its borders, exploiting peripheral areas through measures such as imposing tribute on conquered peoples, and maintaining internal order. From the outset, Rome's military typified this pattern, and the majority of Rome's campaigns were characterized by one of two types. The first is the territorial expansionist campaign, normally begun as a counter-offensive, in which each victory brought subjugation of large areas of territory and allowed Rome to grow from a small town to a population of 55 million in the early empire when expansion was halted. The second is the Civil War, which plagued Rome from its foundation to its eventual demise. Roman armies were not invincible, despite their formidable reputation and host of victories. Romans produced their share of incompetents, who led Roman armies into catastrophic defeats. Nevertheless, it was generally the fate of even the greatest of Rome's enemies, such as Pyrrhus and Hannibal, to win the battle but lose the war. The history of Rome's campaigning is, if nothing else, a history of obstinate persistence overcoming appalling losses. Kingdom. Knowledge of Roman history stands apart from other civilizations in the ancient world. Its chronicles, military and otherwise, document the city's very foundation to its eventual demise. Although some histories have been lost, such as Trajan's account of the Dacian Wars, and others, such as Rome's earliest histories, at least semi-apocryphal, the extant histories of Rome's military history are extensive. Rome's earliest history, from the time of its founding as a small tribal village, to the downfall of its kings, is the least well preserved. Although the early Romans were literate to some degree, this void may be due to the lack of wool to record their history at that time, or such histories as they did record were lost. Although the Roman historian Livy lists a series of 7 kings of early Rome in his work Ab Condita, from its establishment through its earliest years, the first 4 kings may be apocryphal. A number of points of view have been proposed. Grant and others argue that, prior to the establishment of the Etruscan kingdom of Rome under the traditional 5th king, Tarquinius Priscus, Rome would have been led by a religious leader of some sort. Very little is known of Rome's military history from this era, and what history has come down to us is more of a legendary than of factual nature. Traditionally, Romulus, after founding the city, fortified the Palatine Hill, and shortly thereafter, Rome was equal to any of the surrounding cities in her prowess in war. The first of the campaigns fought by the Romans in this legendary account are the wars with various Latin cities and the Sabines. According to Livy, the Latin village of Caenina responded to the event of the abduction of the Sabine women by invading Roman territory, but were routed and the village captured. The Latins of Antemnae and those of Crustumerium were defeated next in a similar fashion. The remaining main body of the Sabines attacked Rome and briefly captured the citadel, but were then convinced to conclude a treaty with the Romans under which the Sabines became Roman citizens. There was a further war in the 8th century BC against Fidenae and Very. In the 7th century BC there was a war with Alba Longa, a second war with Fidenae and Very, and a second Sabine war. Ancus Marcius led Rome to victory against the Latins and, according to the Fasta Triumphales, over the Ventus and Sabines also. Tarquinius Priscus Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. A first war was waged against the Latins. Tarquinius took the Latin town of Appiale by storm and took great booty from there back to Rome. According to the Fasta Triumphales, the war occurred prior to 588 BC. His military ability was tested by an attack from the Sabines. Tarquinius doubled the numbers of equites to help the war effort and defeat the Sabines. In the peace negotiations that followed, Tarquinius received the town of Calatia and appointed his nephew, Aruns Tarquinius, also known as Agerius, as commander of the garrison which he stationed in that city. Tarquinius returned to Rome and celebrated a triumph for his victories that, according to the Fasta Triumphales, occurred on the 13th of September 585 BC. Subsequently the Latin cities of Corniculum, Old Ficulalia, Camarilla, Crustumerium, Ameriola, Medullia and Nomentum were subdued and became Roman. Servius Tullius. Early in his reign, Servius Tullius warred against Very and the Etruscans. He is said to have shown valor in the campaign, and to have routed a great army of the enemy. The war helped him to cement his position at Rome. According to the Fasta Triumphales, Servius celebrated 3 triumphs over the Etruscans, including on the 25th of November 571 BC and the 25th of May 567 BC. Tarquinius Superbus. Early in his reign, Tarquinius Superbus, Rome's 7th and final king, called a meeting of the Latin leaders at which he persuaded them to renew their treaty with Rome and become her allies rather than her enemies. And it was agreed that the troops of the Latins would attend at a grove sacred to the goddess Frontina on an appointed day to form a united military force with the troops of Rome. This was done, and Tarquin formed combined units of Roman and Latin troops. Tarquin next began a war against the Vulture. He took the wealthy town of Seleucia, with the spoils of which he commenced the erection of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus which his father had vowed. He also celebrated a triumph for his victory. He was next engaged in a war with Gabii, one of the Latin cities, which had rejected the Latin treaty with Rome. Unable to take the city by force of arms, Tarquin had his son, Sextus Tarquinius, infiltrate the city, gain the trust of its people and command of its army. In time he killed or exiled the city's leaders, and handed control of the city over to his father. Tarquin also agreed to a peace with the Equi, and renewed the treaty of peace between Rome and the Etruscans. According to the Fasta Triumphales, Tarquin also won a victory over the Sabines. Tarquinius later went to war with the Rutuli. According to Livy, the Rutuli were, at that time, a very wealthy nation. Tarquinius was desirous of obtaining the booty which would come with victory over the Rutuli. Tarquin unsuccessfully sought to take the Rutulian capital, Ardea, by storm, and subsequently began an extensive siege of the city. The war was interrupted by the revolution which overthrew the Roman monarchy. The Roman army, camped outside Ardea, welcomed Lucius Junius Brutus as their new leader, and expelled the king's sons. It is unclear what was the outcome of the siege, or indeed the war.